The rains had not yet fallen on Ayetoro village. Chief Fashola stood at his son's wedding, smiling, but his heart burned with jealousy. He was already planning how to take the bride for himself. The rains had not yet fallen on Ayetoro village. Chief Babajide Fashola, standing 6'3" with a broad, heavy-set frame, villagers quietly gathered myth to where it all began.
The rains had not yet fallen on Ayetoro village when Chief Babajide Fashola stood at his son's wedding, smiling in front of everyone, while his heart burned with something no father should ever feel for his own son's bride. Nobody in that crowd knew that the man handing out kola nuts and blessing the couple was already planning in the quiet chambers of his mind how to take her for himself. If you've ever wondered how far jealousy can twist a man's soul, stay with me, because this story will shake you. And if stories like this move you, hit that subscribe button now, because what happens next in this village will leave you speechless. Let me take you back to where it all began. In Ayetoro, Chief Babajide Fashola owned farmlands that stretched beyond the eye could see. He had 2 wives, 12 children, and a compound so large that visitors sometimes got lost trying to find the main house. He was respected. He was feared. Elders consulted him before making decisions for the village, and young men bowed low whenever his shadow crossed their path. But behind the beaded necklace and the agbada he wore with pride, Chief Babajide carried a heart that was rotting in places nobody could see. His last-born son, Kolade, was different from his father in every way. Where Babajide was calculating, Kolade was warm. Where the chief measured every relationship by what he could gain from it, Kolade gave freely, expecting nothing back. The villagers loved Kolade, and some even said, quietly, in corners where the chief could not hear, that Kolade would make a far better leader than his father ever was. This comparison, whispered though it was, reached Babajide's ears eventually, and it planted a seed of resentment in him long before Bola ever entered the picture. Bola was not from Ayetoro. She came from a neighboring village, Ijoko, the daughter of a respected herbalist. She was known for her beauty, yes, but more than that, she was known for her wit, her kindness, and the way she carried herself like a woman who understood her own worth without needing anyone to remind her of it. When Kolade met her at a market gathering, something shifted in him immediately. He courted her for 8 months, visiting her father's compound with gifts, proving his intentions were serious. And when he finally brought her home as his wife, the entire village celebrated for 3 days. Chief Babajide danced at that wedding. He poured libations for the ancestors. He blessed the union in front of everyone. But that night, alone in his room, he could not sleep. He kept seeing Bola's face, the way she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke, the way she moved with a grace that made the room feel smaller around her. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself he was only admiring his son's good fortune. But by the 3rd week of her living in his compound as Kolade's wife, Babajide knew he was lying to himself. Now, here is where the story stops being simple. Because you might think this is just a tale about an old man's foolish infatuation. But there is more beneath the surface, and I need you to pay close attention, because nothing in this compound was what it appeared to be. You see, Chief Babajide had a first wife, Morenike, who had been married to him for over 30 years. Morenike was not a foolish woman. She had survived decades in that compound by watching everything, saying little, and keeping her own counsel. She noticed the way her husband's eyes followed Bola across the courtyard. She noticed how he found reasons to visit Kolade's quarters when Kolade himself was not there. She noticed, and she said nothing. Not yet, because Morenike was waiting. She had her own history with Babajide, her own wounds from years of watching him chase after younger women, and she had learnt that confronting him directly only made him more careful, more secretive. So she watched and she waited, and she began quietly to build her own case. months into the marriage, Chief Babajide began sending Kolade away on trade missions. At first, these seemed ordinary: a journey to Abeokuta to negotiate palm oil prices, a trip to Ibadan to settle land disputes on the family's behalf. Kolade, being a dutiful son, agreed each time, without question. He trusted his father completely. He had no reason not to. But each time Kolade left, Babajide found himself lingering longer near Bola's quarters, offering to check on her welfare since her husband was away, bringing her gifts of cloth and beads that a father-in-law had no business bringing a daughter-in-law. Bola noticed. Of course she noticed. She was not a naive girl. She had grown up around men, she understood the games they played, and she recognized the particular hunger in Babajide's eyes, even when he tried to disguise it as fatherly concern. But what could she do? He was the chief. He was her husband's father. To accuse him without proof would be to destroy her own marriage, to bring shame on herself in a village that was not even her own. So she did what many women in her position have done throughout history. She kept her distance politely. She never allowed herself to be alone with him if she could help it. She spoke to him with the respect due a father-in-law, but she made sure there was always a wall between them, invisible but firm. This only made Babajide want her more. Now, here is the twist that changes everything you thought you understood about this story. Because Babajide was not simply a lonely old man overcome by desire. He was a man who had done this before. Years earlier, before Kolade was even born, Babajide had been involved in a scandal that the village had long forgotten or chosen to forget. A young woman, a servant in his household at the time, had disappeared without explanation. The official story was that she had run away, ashamed after being caught stealing from the compound. But Morenike knew better. Morenike had seen the way that servant girl used to cry in the kitchen at night. Morenike had heard rumors, never confirmed, that the girl had refused Babajide's advances one too many times, and that her disappearance was not a runaway at all, but something far darker, arranged through the chief's connections with certain traders who dealt in more than just goods. This was the secret Morenike tarried. This was why when she saw the same look in her husband's eyes toward Bola, dread settled deep in her bones. Because she knew what Babajide was capable of when a woman refused him for too long. Before I continue, let me pause here for a moment. If this story is gripping you the way I think it is, make sure you are subscribed, because the next part of this tale is going to reveal something that changes the entire direction of everything you've heard so far.
6 months into Bola's marriage, Kolade was sent away again. This time on the longest trip yet, a full-moon cycle to negotiate with traders in Kano. Before he left, Bola felt a strange unease she could not explain. She begged him not to go, told him something felt wrong, that his father's insistence on these constant trips felt suspicious to her. Kolade, trusting and good-hearted as he was, laughed off her worries. "My father only wants what's best for our family's business," he told her. "You worry too much, my love. I will be back before you know it." But Bola's instincts were sharper than her husband's trust. With Kolade gone, Babajide made his move. One evening, under the guise of discussing family matters, he summoned Bola to his private quarters. She went, reluctantly, because refusing a direct summons from the chief would have been seen as disrespectful, and she could not afford suspicion falling on her without cause. When she arrived, she found him alone. No elders present, no witnesses, just candlelight and the chief sitting too close for comfort. He did not waste time with pretense that night. He told her in a voice thick with a desire he could no longer contain that he had fallen for her, that he had watched her from the moment she entered his compound, that Kolade did not deserve a woman like her, that he, Babajide, could give her a life far greater than his son ever could. He told her that if she accepted him, she would want for nothing, that he would make her his third wife with honor, that no one would dare speak against it because he was the chief and his word was law in Ayetoro. Bola stood frozen for a moment, disgusted and terrified in equal measure. Then she found her voice.
She told him clearly and without flinching that she loved his son, that she would never betray her marriage vows, and that she would forget this conversation ever happened if he never spoke to her this way again. She turned to leave. But Babajide was not a man accustomed to rejection. He grabbed her wrist as she turned, and in that moment something cold entered his voice. He told her that she should think carefully about her decision, that things could go very badly for a young bride who dared to disrespect the head of the household, that accidents happened, that reputations could be destroyed with a single rumor of witchcraft or infidelity, and that no one, not even Kolade, would believe her word over his. It was a threat, clear and unmistakable. And Bola understood in that terrifying instant that she was in far more danger than she had ever imagined. She pulled her wrist free and fled his quarters that night, shaking, her mind racing. She could not tell Kolade, not yet, not while he was days away and unable to act. She could not tell the other wife, not certain where her loyalties truly lay. She felt, for the first time since arriving in Ayetoro, completely alone. But she was wrong about being alone, because Morenike had been watching. Morenike had suspected something like this would happen eventually, and on the very night Babajide summoned Bola to his quarters, Morenike positioned herself close enough to hear raised voices, close enough to see Bola flee in tears. She said nothing that night, but the next morning she found a quiet moment to speak with Bola alone in the back garden where no one else could hear. "I know what happened," she said simply, "and I believe you." Bola broke down in relief, the tension of carrying that secret alone finally releasing. Morenike listened to everything, the threats, the advances, the fear that had settled in Bola's chest since Babajide grabbed her wrist. And then Morenike told her something that changed the entire shape of this story. "This is not the first time," she said, her voice heavy with decades of buried grief. "There was another girl many years ago, before your husband was even born. She refused him too, and she disappeared." The revelation hit Bola like a blow to the chest. This was not simply a lonely old man's foolish infatuation. This was a pattern, a dangerous repeating pattern that had already potentially cost one woman her life. And now Bola understood the true weight of the danger she was in. Together, the two women began to plan. Morenike, having endured 30 years in that compound, knew things about her husband that even his own children did not know. She knew which of his associates could be trusted and which could not. She knew about a trader named Adisa who had helped Babajide handle the disappearance of that servant decades ago, a man who still visited the compound occasionally under the guise of business dealings. If Babajide intended to make good on his threat against Bola, Adisa would likely be involved again. So, Morenike sent a single, careful message, not to two separate people, but to one man she trusted above all others in matters like this, her own brother, a respected court elder in a neighboring town. She asked him to quietly look into any rumors involving Adisa and disappearances over the years, and to move quickly because she feared time was short. This would not be a slow inquiry. She made sure her brother understood the urgency, and she asked him to bring what he found directly to Baba Alao, the most senior elder in Ayetoro's own council, a man Morenike trusted to act on proof rather than gossip. Here is where the suspense truly built. Because just when you think you understand the danger Bola faces, another layer reveals itself. Because Babajide was not the only one with secrets in that household. It turned out that Babajide's second wife, a woman named Yetunde, had her own long-standing resentment toward Bola, though for entirely different reasons. Yetunde's own daughter had once hoped to marry Kolade, an arrangement Yetunde had quietly pushed for before Kolade returned from Ijoko with Bola already as his bride. Yetunde had never forgiven the disruption of her plans, and though she had no knowledge of Babajide's twisted obsession, her jealousy toward Bola made her an unpredictable variable in an already dangerous situation. When Yetunde noticed the private conversations between Morenike and Bola in the garden, she grew suspicious, assuming they were plotting something against her own daughter's interests, and she began watching them both closely, reporting small observations to Babajide without even realizing the danger she was creating.
This is the kind of layered tension that makes a story unforgettable. And if you're feeling the suspense building right now, that's exactly the point. Because we haven't even reached the most shocking twist yet. Stay close, because what happens next will surprise you. 10 days after the confrontation in Babajide's quarters, word arrived that Kolade's return had been delayed further, another 2 weeks due to complications in the Kano negotiations. Bola's fear deepened with every passing day. Babajide, for his part, grew bolder, finding excuses to be near her, sending servants with gifts she refused to accept, making comments at family meals that carried double meanings only she and Morenike understood. Then, one night, Yetunde, still suspicious of the whispered conversations between Morenike and Bola, decided to confront Babajide directly, believing she was protecting her own daughter's future interests. She told him she believed the two women were conspiring against the family, perhaps even planning to expose some scandal to damage his reputation and Kolade's inheritance. She had no idea how close to the truth her words actually were, but her warning struck a nerve in Babajide, and it accelerated his plans in a direction that would soon spiral out of control. Fearing exposure, Babajide decided he needed to act before Kolade's return. If Bola would not come to him willingly, he would create a situation where she had no choice, or, better yet, remove the obstacle entirely and frame the removal as something else altogether. He remembered Adisa, the trader who had helped him decades before, and he sent a message calling him to the compound under cover of darkness. But that message never reached its destination in time to matter, because by the very same evening Babajide's messenger set out for Adisa, word had already reached Baba Alao from Morenike's brother, confirming that Adisa's name was tied to more than one disappearance across several villages over the years. Baba Alao, a careful man who did not act on rumor alone, had quietly begun making his own inquiries days earlier at Morenike's urging, and by the time Babajide's summons went out, elders in 2 neighboring villages were already comparing notes on the trader's history. Adisa himself, sensing the net closing in around him from multiple directions, went into hiding before Babajide's message ever found him, terrified of being caught with blood on his hands while the chief who ordered it walked free. Bola, though she did not yet know it, had already been saved from immediate danger by the very investigation Morenike had set in motion the moment she learned the truth. Before I tell you what happened next, if you've made it this far into the story, you already know this is not your typical folktale. Make sure you're subscribed because the climax of this story is about to unfold and you do not want to miss how it ends. With Adisa gone into hiding and unreachable, Morenike knew she could not wait any longer for more evidence to fall into place on its own. She decided to force the matter into the open herself, using her standing as first wife and her decades of unquestionable loyalty to the family to request an urgent meeting with the village council, citing matters of family honor without revealing the full truth in advance. She knew that if she exposed everything too early without proof, Babajide could simply deny everything and destroy both her and Bola's credibility using his considerable influence in the village. But with Baba Alao already quietly aware of the rumors surrounding Adisa, she believed she finally had enough of a foundation to press the issue in front of witnesses who would not simply take the chief's word as final. So she arranged for Bola to be present but silent during the meeting, positioned near enough to a hidden alcove that had, unknown to Babajide, served as a listening point for decades, a detail Morenike knew from her 30 years in that same compound. Then, under the pretense of discussing an unrelated land inheritance dispute, Morenike steered the conversation towards Adisa, mentioning his name casually,
watching Babajide's reaction carefully in front of the elders. Babajide, unaware of how much Morenike truly knew about Adisa, grew visibly agitated at the mention of Adisa's name in front of the elders, an agitation the sharp-eyed elders noticed immediately, given his usual composed demeanor. Sensing an opening, Morenike pressed further, asking innocently why the mention of an old trading partner would unsettle the chief so deeply. Cornered and unable to explain his reaction without raising further suspicion, Babajide made a critical error. He lashed out, accusing Morenike of trying to embarrass him in front of the elders, his voice rising with an anger that revealed far more than his words intended. It was in that moment of rising anger, that loss of control so unusual for a man known throughout Ayetoro for his composure, that Baba Alao, who had already been quietly gathering testimonies for days, asked a simple but devastating question. Chief Babajide, is there something about Adisa's business dealings that troubles you? Because I have heard things this past week that trouble me greatly. The room fell silent. And in that silence, Babajide's carefully constructed reputation began to crack. He tried to recover, tried to laugh it off as nothing more than old business frustrations, but the damage was done. Baba Alao revealed plainly and without further delay what the inquiries had already uncovered. Testimonies from families in neighboring villages who had lost daughters under mysterious circumstances, all connected in some way to the very trader Babajide had just tried to summon in secret that same week, a coincidence far too glaring to ignore.
But here is the twist within the twist, the moment that changes everything. Word soon reached the elders that Adisa, upon learning investigations were closing in from multiple sides, had gone into hiding rather than risk being caught alone, fearing that Babajide would let him take the fall to protect his own reputation as chief. Within days, driven by that same fear, Adisa sent word from wherever he was hiding, offering a full account of everything in exchange for leniency. He confessed to the disappearance of the servant girl decades ago, arranged at Babajide's request after she refused his advances, and he revealed the message Babajide had sent that very week, asking him to make the new bride disappear quietly if she continued to refuse him, disguised as an arrangement to send her back to her father's village in shame over false accusations of infidelity that Babajide had planned to fabricate. The village elders were stunned into silence. This was not simply a scandal of infidelity or family dishonor. This was a confession of premeditated harm against not one, but potentially multiple women over decades, orchestrated by the very man entrusted with the village's leadership and moral guidance. Word of the confession spread through Ayetoro like wildfire. By the time Kolade finally returned from Kano, unaware of everything that had transpired in his absence, he found his father under house arrest by order of the village council, his wife Bola, shaken but safe, protected throughout the ordeal by Morenike's careful planning, and the entire compound in an uproar over revelations that would forever change how the village viewed their once respected chief. Kolade's return brought its own emotional storm. Learning that his own father had attempted to seduce his wife, threatened her life, and had potentially been responsible for the death of an innocent servant girl decades earlier, shattered something fundamental in him. He confronted his father directly, demanding to know how a man could betray his own son so completely, how the father who raised him, who taught him about honor and respect, could harbor such darkness for so long. Babajide, finally cornered, with no more lies left to hide behind, broke down completely. He did not deny the accusations. Instead, in a moment of raw and ugly honesty, he admitted that jealousy had consumed him the moment he saw how happy his son was, how effortlessly Kolade had won Bola's love, something Babajide himself had never truly earned from either of his own wives, who had married him more out of duty and family arrangement than genuine affection.
He admitted that watching his son possess something he himself had always wanted, real, mutual love, had twisted into an obsession he could no longer control. It was a confession that offered no redemption, only explanation, and Kolade found no comfort in understanding his father's twisted motivations. If anything, it deepened his heartbreak, realizing that his father's love for him had curdled into resentment the moment Kolade found happiness his father never had. The village council convened for a final judgment. Given the severity of the confessions, including the historical disappearance that Adisa had confirmed, Babajide was stripped of his chieftaincy title immediately, a punishment almost unheard of in Ayetoro's history. He was banished from the compound he had built, forbidden from ever holding a position of authority again, and ordered to provide reparations to the family of the servant girl who disappeared decades earlier, a family the council, using Adisa's confession, was finally able to track down and compensate after all those years of silence. Adisa faced his own separate judgment for his role in the disappearances, a judgment handled by a joint council of elders from the affected villages, since his crimes had crossed beyond Ayetoro's borders alone. As for Yetunde, when the truth of what Yetunde's warnings to Babajide had nearly caused came fully to light, the elders judged her harshly for feeding suspicion into a dangerous man's hands, even without knowing the full weight of what she was fueling. She was made to publicly apologize to Bola and Morenike before the council, and she was stripped of her privileges as second wife, though allowed to remain in the village under the watch of her own family, a lesser punishment than Babajide's, but a public shaming she carried for the rest of her days, a lasting reminder that jealousy and suspicion, even when born of a mother's disappointment, can open doors to far greater harm than intended. Morenike, whose courage and careful planning ultimately exposed the truth, was celebrated by the village for her wisdom, though the victory came with deep personal grief, having spent 30 years married to a man capable of such darkness. She chose to remain in Ayetoro, not in the compound that held so many painful memories, but in a smaller home provided by the grateful community, finally free from the shadow she had lived under for decades. Bola and Kolade faced their own path forward, one marked by trauma, but also by an unshakable bond forged through crisis. Kolade struggled for months.
If this story moved you, the way it moved everyone who has ever heard it told around a fire in Ayetoro, do not scroll away without hitting that subscribe button, because there are more stories like this waiting for you. Stories of hidden truths, family betrayal, and justice that always finds its way home. Drop a comment below and tell me what part of this story shocked you the most. Was it Babajide's twisted obsession, Morenike's quiet courage, or the shocking confession that unraveled everything? Let me know, and I will see you in the next story, because trust me, this village still has many more secrets left to tell.